In this video, we're going to talk all about data, how to model and set up your database, and then how to display things in the front end, and how to pass data along, especially with nested data structures. Now, this is one of the more tricky things to do, not because it's tricky in FlutterFlow, but because it's conceptually tricky. But I'm going to give you some mental models to help you do kind of anything you want to do with data in your app. So let's start out with the simplest task, and that's just getting some data into our database, into our Firestore, and then displaying it. Then we'll move on to more tricky matters. So I've already got a project set up here, just 2 pages. I've set up my Firebase and Firestore. If you haven't done that yet, to follow along, you're going to need to do this. We put links in the description so you can follow along. It'll take 10 minutes tops, and then come back here and we can do this. So here I've just got a blank page. It's called lists. It's just going to be a list of products. And so let's go over to our database, and here we just have our users collection, and let's make a new collection. And let's just say we're going to have a merch collection here. We're going to have some merchandise. So we create it. Okay, great. So here we've got an empty collection. So let's add some merchandise, say like a t-shirt and a mug. Now, you might think that that's where we do it here, that we like add those things, they're called documents here, but that's not how it works. Here is where we set up our schema, and that is what properties will each of our pieces of merchandise have? So will it have a name? Are we going to track inventory? So maybe we would want an inventory property that was an integer. Maybe we would want a bunch of options, say the color that this merchandise was available in. That's what we set up here. After we set up our schema, then we can actually add the individual merch to our collections, and those in Firestore are called documents. Okay, so obviously we're going to have a name, right? So let's just start out with name. And then we got to specify the data type, and that's going to be a string. Is this a list? No, each one is just going to have one name, and so we create it. Okay, this is the simplest setup we could think of, so let's just leave it here, right? We got this. Okay, so now we've got our schema, so let's manage our content. All right, so let's go over to our merch, and let's just add some things. So add a document, so that's each item in our collection. And so when we pull this up, we can see the schema right here. We've got a name property. That's the name property we just set up, that name schema. And so if we had other schema, it would be populated here as well. So let's just have a t-shirt and a hat, not a mat, a hat, and a mug. Okay, great. Once again, simplest setup we could possibly have. Now, let's go back to our app and let's display it now. Okay, so we've got a column right here, and we want to display a list of our products. So whenever you're displaying a list of things, you're going to need a widget that supports many things. So if we just go over to our builder right here, you can see the types of things that we could use. So a column or a row. One thing to keep in mind when you're setting up backend queries on widgets is that if you're doing it on a column or a row, those are only meant for a few items, say like less than 20. If you have a lot of documents, you want to use a list view or a grid view. These are made for rendering a lot of data, but we just have a few, so we can use our column that we've already got set up here. Okay, so we've got a column. This is the widget for displaying multiple children. So now let's just do the simplest possible setup. Let's grab a text widget and throw it in here. Okay, so we are ready. We're all set up. Our UI is set up so that we can display our merch. So we want to come to our column. See our tree right here. And then we want to be in our backend query here. And we want to query, so we're making a call, we're making a query to our back end. Now, we're not doing an Algolia search, we're not calling to an external service like Twitter or something like that. We're not getting a document from reference. We're going to talk about that in our next example. We're just querying a collection. This query collection is the most basic, most fundamental call. That is, we're just connecting to our database. So we're querying our collection. Okay, build Firebase query. Great. Now it's asking us, which collection do we want to connect to? So we open this up. We want to connect to our merch collection. Okay, cool. So now we've got more options. Do we want a single document? Remember, document was just one of those things we made. So a t-shirt or that one mug, or do we want a list of documents? Well, we want a list of documents. And remember here, when you first start using FlutterFlow, you might be confused with the word documents. Once again, documents is just an item in a collection. Or you can think about it if you come from SQL database world or Airtable, it's a record, an item. It's not a document like a PDF. That's not what this is talking about. Okay, so we want a list of documents. Cool. Now, down here, we could filter it, we can order it, which is super helpful, but we're not gonna do any of that right now. Remember, we want the simplest possible setup, so let's just confirm that. Now here we get a really helpful pop-up. We're gonna create, it's telling us what we're gonna do. We're gonna create a backend query, and it tells us, by adding a backend query to this column, you're telling it to generate its children dynamically from the return list of merch documents. That is to say, we've got a bunch of merch documents, t-shirt, mug, hat, and we're gonna make children out of each one of those things. And because we're gonna be generating like presumably a bunch of things, normally you just don't have 3 things, normally you have a bunch of things, you wanna say, hey, just FYI, this is what's happening, that is indeed what we want to happen, so we confirm it. Okay, cool. So now we see these sort of like ghost text widgets right here. You can select them, and this is actually not the right number of items, but that's not the purpose of this display. This is just giving us a visual representation of what's going on. Hey, you're making a database call on your column here, and you're generating a bunch of children. Just FYI, I want you to visually see that. Awesome. Thank you so much, FlutterFlow. This is also because we will only see these backend Firebase calls displayed here when we run in test or run mode. We don't see them in the UI builder. But FlutterFlow wants us to know, hey, there's some stuff going on here, and I can visually communicate that. Okay, great. So we've made this call on our column. Now, there's one other step we need to do, because if you think about it, we've connected to this data source, and so we've plugged in the light, but we haven't flicked on the light. Right? And we need to, that is, we're connected to the energy, to the source, but we're not doing anything with that source. So we need to come down to our text widget, and we want to connect it because we want to display the name of each of these things. So here is where our text is, right? And this is where you can just put whatever in, but we don't want it, we want it set from a variable. We want it dynamic, right? So we set from variable. And if you see here, we've got this merch document. And if we just go to this I here, it gives us this nice helper. It's from our column query, right? So we can see all the other things that we can bind this text to. But what we want to do is we want to bind it to a merch document. Once again, that's each individual item in our database. Okay, so we're going to bind it. Now we get our available options. Remember, we set up this schema, this field right here. If we'd set up other ones, we would have other ones available here as long as it is of the data type text, because that's kind of widgets we're using. Okay, but we want to bind it to name. Okay, awesome. So now our UI changed, and we can see in our brackets here, we have name, which is the schema name that we have. Okay, awesome. So we're all set up. That's everything. We can just test this now and see if we've set it up correctly. Awesome. So here it is. Here's our list of products that we've pulled from our database. Okay, so that's pretty simple, right? So let's move up a level in difficulty. Okay, so what do we want to do? Well, let's add some more data, some more properties to our merch that we've got right here. So let's go back into Firestore, let's go into our merch, and let's add a new field, and let's call this colors. So maybe we can get our merch in different types of colors. And for this one, let's just have it be a string, but this time let's make it a list, okay? You might also know these as arrays. Okay, let's turn that on. Great. So now we've got this, and let's add some stuff to it. So let's manage our content. Great. Let's go into our merch. Here we go, and we see we get this new column for our additional schema. So let's come in here, let's edit our mug, and once again we have this, and so let's add some items to this list, and we're gonna say red and green, update that. Then we're gonna say pink, blue. Let's add one more. Let's say yellow. And on the last one, we'll just have one, and we'll just say orange. Great. So now we've got a more complex data setup, because in our documents, we've just got a name, but then we have a nested data structure, right? We've got a property of colors, but inside our colors, we have a list, an array. So we have a bunch of things going on here. Okay, so now let's figure out how to display this. And let's say our scenario is we've got a list of products, we want to click into them, and then on the page, we see further information. Because this is like a super common pattern, right? Where you've got a list of stuff, and on the first level, you have the fundamental data about it, like its name. And then when you go into it, you see a bunch of more information. That's like on every product website that exists. Okay, so let's just get rid of our text now so we have a little bit more robust view here, and let's add a card, and inside of our card let's have our text widget back. That's great, and then that'll be good. So let's just come to our card, and in our text widget let's just add some padding right here, just some simple styling, make clicking easier. Let's just lock that in so we got some room. Okay, great. So now we still have our column. We didn't change that. That's bound to our collection, a list of documents. That's all great. Then we want to go to our text. Remember, we want to bind that to the name so we just know what we're on. We got our name, so that's great. So we're all good there. All right, so now let's set up our action. So we grab our card right here, and we want to say, hey, when we click on it, we want to navigate to our item page right here, individual item page. That's all sounds good. And here's the first step for configuring our data correctly, our parameters. And what parameters are is their data, their information that we pass on this action. So this action is navigating. And so we're saying, hey, when we navigate, we want to pass some information as we navigate, okay? And we're going to define what parameters we want to pass here. So we want, now notice we skipped over to our item page. It popped us over to our item page. And here's a helpful way to think about it, is that when you're passing data, you need a sender and a receiver. So here we're sending the data and you're receiving. I kind of think about like if someone's sending you an Amazon package and it just gets dumped in your yard and you don't have anyone to receive it, well, you can't really do anything with it. For you to do something with your new toaster, you have to have someone to receive it so they can like open it up and set it up. And it's the same thing here. We're on a receiving page and we may send the data over when we click, but if we don't have a receiver, then it's going to be useless. So here we're going to add a parameter on this page, and we are going to call it colors, and then we're just going to say receive here, just so when we see that parameter, we know exactly what it is. And the type is going to be what? Now, you might first think that, oh, well, I'm passing a string, right? Because I'm going to want to display all of those strings, you know, all of those colors. But remember, we're not just displaying one color, we're passing a bunch of colors. So you might come down and say, okay, so maybe you're passing like a document right here. And we're getting closer, but this document isn't tied to anything, right? We want a document reference. And here's the next helpful conceptual thing to have in mind. When you're passing data between pages, and especially now when we're talking about passing documents, passing records from our database, we're not actually passing the record itself, but we're passing a reference to our document. Because once we're on the page, we're gonna do some stuff. We're say, hey, I've got a location, I've got an ID, I've got a reference to that document. Now I wanna do some stuff, right? I'm gonna do a query, I'm gonna look this stuff up, and then I'm gonna display certain things from our document. So we want document reference. And what collection is it? Well, it's our merch collection. And there we're all set up and it pops us back helpfully to our list of products. Okay, so we set up the receiver. We set up the parameter on the page to receive the document reference. Now we need to set up the sender. That is, we need to set up the action and tell it what we want to pass in the parameters. So here we are, we're in our action flow editor, we're inside that navigation action, and now we need to pass the parameter. So we want to select the parameter to pass, and it auto recognizes the parameter that we set up on the receiving page. But that's not all. We need to click into here, and we see the parameter, that's correct, but we need to set it in here. So what do we want to set it to? We want to set it to the merch document. Now, once again, if we highlight over here, FlutterFlow is telling us, hey, you're getting this merch document from this column query right here. And that's exactly what we want. We want this merch document. And what do you want in here? These are the available options we have for what we want to pass. Well, let's think about this. What do we want to pass? Well, if we wanted to just pass the colors, well, then we could do that. But what we actually want to do is pass a reference to the whole document, because maybe we want to reference other things. So we want a reference to this document. Boom. Great. So we've set up our sender action with its parameters and our receiver, those parameters on that page. Now we have to go over to that page because here in our individual item, we've passed it. The page has this reference, but it's not doing anything with it. Okay, so first step, let's just bind our text, our title of our page right here to our merch item, our merch document with its title, so like mug or something like that, whatever we clicked on. So how would we do that? Well, you might think that we just come over and we set it from variable because we got our document ID here from our parameters, right? We've got a document reference. So shouldn't we be able to just bind this? Well, let's see what happens. So we set it from variable. We see this colors received. This icon right here means it's coming from our parameters that we received. So this should be pretty easy. So let's just click on there. That seems good, and confirm. No, that doesn't work. Because remember, what we've gotten in the page through the parameters is a document reference, like an ID. So we actually have to take that ID and get our document. We just have a reference. It's like the Dewey Decimal System at a library. We've got a number, but now we've got to go get it. Okay, so how would we do that? So let's get out of here. Let's come into our page, our scaffold right here, and we're going to do a backend query, and we're going to come in here and we're going to want our document from reference. Okay, yeah, that makes sense, right? Because we've got our reference through our parameters. We've got this ID, and now we want to get our document. We want our document from our reference. Okay, great. Now we set which collection are we going to do a lookup on, and so we're going to say merch, and then we want to say, well, what reference do we want to use to look up in our collection? What ID, right? So we come in here and we see, now that parameter is value, right? That document reference, not document from reference, the document reference itself, the reference to the document. That's what we want. So we can confirm that. And now we're all ready to bind our text. So let's come over here, do our same thing, but now we're going to see something else. See, this is our document reference, the actual reference, like the ID to that thing, but here is the document itself. And that's what we want. And now we see what we would expect. We've got access to all the properties in our document, and we want name. Okay, perfect. So let's just test this out, right? Okay, great. We got our list of products, and when we click in, we can see we've got the name of our merch documents being passed correctly. Okay, great. Now to the fun part. So here, we want to see those color options. Now, how do we do this? You know, you may think, all right, let's just throw some text widgets in here and like set them to our merch document, color list, and I'm binding it to our colors property, but I don't have any available options to set here. I mean, I can set the number of items, and that's just going to show us like how many colors we've set for them. So remember, we did 3 and 2, I think, maybe 1. But that's not what we want. Well, why can't we do this? Well, when we've bound data before, it's because the property we bound to was a string. And so if you think about it, the name, the value of the property name is a string. But the value of the property that we're trying to bind here of colors is another data structure. It's a list. It's not a string. So we need to bind this to a widget that is able to accept lists. Now, what is that? Well, yeah, that's like anything that has multiple items in it. So like column or row or list view, right? So let's delete our text right here. And instead, let's just add a simple column. And inside our column, we want to add a text widget. Okay, so we're all set up. So now we should be ready to go because we got a column here and we can do a bunch of text. And of course, when we try to do this, our merch document, colors list, the same thing happens, right? Well, because we're just in the same situation right here. We just dumped it into a column, right? But what we want is we want a bunch of text widgets that are based on or bound to each of the items in our list. So how would we do that? So let's come to our column here, and you might think, hey, we need to do like a backend query, right? Because we're getting data from our backend. But remember, we've already got that document, right? We've done a backend query up on our main body, our scaffold, our homepage right here. We've already got a reference to the document in our merch collection. So that is to say, we've already made a connection. So we don't need to make another connection. That would be redundant. So instead, we come to our column and we need to come over here and generate dynamic children because we just want to do something else with the data that we've already got, right? So we come down here and first let's set a variable name, okay? And we're going to need this when we bind this to the text here. So we're just going to call this color text. And then we're going to grab it here and we can see, remember, once again, you might think you want to bind it to this, but that's just the reference, like the ID. That's not the document itself. Here is our document itself. And you notice when we highlight this, it shows us where that binding happened, where that backend query happened and happened on our scaffold, on our home. So we want to come into here, come into our colors list, and notice this is not available, right? Because we're generating children and we don't have children and we just got one here. We need multiple. So we come into here and we should be good. Confirm. And then we confirm here. And once again, we get a little pop-up. We're going to now generate children dynamically from the specified variable. That is what we just set. And that's great. That's exactly what we want. And once again, we see the gray here just to give us a little indication of what's going on. So now we just need to come in, and for the text widgets, we need to bind that to our variable name that we set up from that dynamic children. So we come in, we set from variable and we can see here color text. Remember, that's the variable name we set up. And you can see where it's getting called from. And that's right, it's from this call. We can see that it's from this binding right here. Okay, great. So we click into there and we should be good. All right, once again, here we go. Click in and we can see, boom, we've got orange right there. If we reload, or if we come into hat here, we can see pink, blue, and yellow. Awesome. Okay, so let's do one other thing. Let's say we want to, on our home page right here, display those colors here. Well, how would we do this? Well, we can use the same logic to do it. So remember, we've already got a binding here to our documents right here. So same thing as before. We don't want to just dump a text widget in because the value of our colors is a list. So once again, we need a type of widget that can accept multiple texts. And so once again, we have our same options. So here, so let's just add in a row. But we've already got a text widget here, so let's just add in a column. And then we've got a column here that contains everything with our text, which is already bound, and then our row. So we're going to do the same logic here. So let's add in a text widget right here. And to our row, we're going to generate dynamic children. We're going to call this, let's say, list, so we know what page we're on, because I just want us to be able to see exactly where this variable is coming from. List, colors, text. Okay, great. And then we want to set that to, we've got our merch document. And once again, we hover it over. Where's this coming from? This is coming from our call in our column here. So our merch document, and once again, exactly as we expect, we can bind it to our list right here, and we should be good. Confirm that. Generate dynamic children. We know about this. That's great. And lastly, so we've produced these text widgets, but we haven't bound the text itself to those colors. So let's just bind that up. Set from variable. This is old news at this point. That's what we want. Confirm, and let's test it. Awesome. And here we are using the same logic here. We've been able to display the list of colors on this home page. I hope this is helpful for you. I know that data can be tricky when you're thinking about it, and I hope this model has helped you. Feel free to leave any questions below and we'll try to answer them. If you have any specific questions about how data works in FlutterFlow, please leave them below and we'd be happy to make a video about it to explain it, and we'll see you in the next video.